As we heard, one of the people hoping to shape that debate is Chuka Umunna. He's written a hard-hitting piece in today's Observer, and he's with me now. Welcome.
Morning, Andrew.
Good morning. Now, you heard what Lord Mandelson was saying. Are you happy with the way these rules are going to operate inside the Labour Party's leadership campaign?
Well, one of Ed's great legacies was to reform our party, and we've put in place a series of new rules and reforms that opens out the party and provides us with the opportunity to grow the party during a future leadership contest. So the NEC will apply those rules, and we will hear what the timetable is that they set out.
Now, you said in the Observer, it's quite a hard-hitting piece, you said the Labour Party had hunkered down on its 35% strategy, and that was a disaster. Was that really what people were talking about internally at the time?
Well, first of all, it's worth saying I think that Ed grew in stature and led a courageous campaign. I think in many respects we had the most positive campaign in the face of a onslaught from certain parts of the media, but a very negative campaign on the other side. This loss, our failure to win, is not because of the efforts of our fantastic candidates and activists. I saw them, I spent much of my time in English marginals. It's in spite of their efforts that we lost. And of course, we've lost some fantastic colleagues.
So why did it happen?
Well, I think, first of all, we've got to understand this. So, and draw the right lessons. There will be some who may argue, well, look, but for what happened in Scotland, and of course the results in Scotland were terrible for us, we would have won. Let's be clear, we had a very bad night in Scotland, but David Cameron's majority was won in England. It was the progress and success there that put government out of view for the Labour Party. And let's not forget that, of course, they're going to make these changes to the boundaries, which will make the challenge in England and Wales even greater. But in terms of why we lost, in my view, the Labour Party succeeds and does best when it marries together its compassion for people who can't provide for themselves, for the vulnerable, the poor, with others' ambition and drive and aspiration to get on and do well. And I think in many respects we often had a message which spoke to, for example, people who are struggling on 0 hours contracts. It was right that we tackled that on the national minimum wage, etc. But for, if you like, middle-income voters, there wasn't enough of an aspirational offer there. So that was obviously a key issue.
And
I think also,
well,
I was going to come on to that, because I also have always argued that ultimately, you know, we're a Labour Party. The clue's in the name. It's about ensuring that people have got good, fulfilling work. And in the same way that I don't think you can argue that you are pro-business if you're always beating up on the terms and conditions of the people who make the business what it is and the trade unions that represent it.
That was the impression, wasn't it?
At times, sometimes. But equally, you can't be pro the kind of jobs that we want to see unless you're backing the people that create them. Now, the irony is in some ways that our policy agenda was thoroughly pro-business, but at times, sometimes people got the impression that it wasn't. And also, of course, our economic competence, which, you know, I'm happy to speak about.
Well, let's just stay on the business side, because you were business secretary. Did you actually?
I wish I was business secretary.
Shadow business.
Yeah.
Did you argue hard enough in the kind of inner cadres of the Labour Party against this impression that the party was giving an anti-business, anti-aspirational message? Everyone says it now, but you were there at the time. Did you do enough?
Well, I think ultimately, look, I think Ed was too hard on himself when he said all the responsibility for the failures and the loss. No. Well, let me answer the question. And I don't think it was, you know, all of the fault of Ed. This was a collective failure on the part of all of us who were in the front line. And whilst I've always made the argument I just made to you, in terms of the collective message that we were giving, it sometimes gave the impression at times that we weren't with the wealth creators. And you've got to be with the people who create wealth in our country, because they're the people who create the jobs.
Did you fight that 35% strategy, hunkering down over your core voters, when that was discussed in private?
Well, I was never told that there was specifically a 35% strategy, but if you looked at the offer, that is a conclusion that people were entitled to reach. And I think... And
were you worried about it, and did you talk out about it? Did you argue with colleagues about it?
Well, as I said, look, I'm not into attributing blame here, and as I said, it's a collective failure, and I accept my responsibility for that. But look, one of the big strengths of the Labour Party is actually we're the big tent people. We're the people who have got people all over the country in different regions and parts.
For the many, not the few, except there's only the few that voted for you.
We can't have a message that says anybody is too rich or too poor to be part of our party. What the Labour Party does well is build a big tent of people of different backgrounds, creeds, colours, races, religions, economic circumstances. And it's when we have an offer that is big tent and appeals to a lot of people, that's when we win.
The last time you were in government, did you spend too much?
Well, on the economic competence point, and you're right to ask the question, look, going into the crash, should we have been running an albeit small and historically unremarkable deficit? Of course we shouldn't. But the idea...
We should not have done so.
We should not have run...
And so why would the party, why would neither of the Eds, asked again and again and again, ever say that, ever apologise for it? That was a huge mistake, was it not?
In part, part of the reason, I suppose, there has been a struggle around dealing with this issue is while at the same time we shouldn't have been running that small and historically unremarkable deficit, it is ludicrous to suggest, as the Tories have been, that it's because of overspending on the part of the Labour government.
You could have said all of that a year ago. You could have said, or Ed Balls could have said all of that a year ago, and perhaps you'd have had a better election had you done so.
Look, we've got to learn the lessons and learn from the mistakes, and, you know, let's not beat around the bush on this. The facts are we inherited a debt-to-GDP ratio of 42%. We got it down to 37% before the crash. During the Tories' 18 years in government beforehand, they had had a deficit of 3.2%. It had been an average of 1.3% during our time in government. The reason that we had the big debt and deficit issues coming out of the crash was because of the banking crisis. It wasn't because we were spending too much in schools and hospitals in my constituency in Streatham and beyond. And we needed to nail that. But also, there's another very important part to this, is that in terms of illustrating that we took deficit reduction seriously, I think in some quarters there was a nervousness about making the progressive case for balancing the books, for fear of being portrayed as being austerity light. And what I'm very clear about, there is nothing progressive in spending more on your debt interest repayments, paying off city investors and others every year, than on housing, than on schools.
Okay.
It is not a progressive thing to be doing that, and we should have said that more clearly, in my view.
Now, you've made a very clear statement today and in the newspaper. We assume, therefore, that you're running for the Labour Party leadership.
Well, look, I think it's too early for that at the moment.
That's the old politics.
Well, it might be the old politics, but there isn't even a timetable at the moment. But I certainly intend to play the fullest part I can in rebuilding our party and ensuring that we have a proper debate that we now need to have to make sure we win. And by the way,
that sounds
Andrew,
very close, like a yes. All I'm saying is maybe we're in a stage now after this election defeat where we straight answers to straight questions.
Yes, and I will answer that question. I will give a full answer to that question when we know what the timetable is. But let's be clear. This Labour Party is a fantastic party. We're down, but we're not out. And look, the scale of the defeat is of 92 proportions, but there is no reason why we shouldn't get back in 2020. I don't buy what I've been reading in some of the papers this morning, this idea that somehow this is a 10-year rebuilding project. Absolutely not. We can do this in 5 years if we make the right decisions now and present that aspirational and compassionate case to the British people, which we're so good at. We can do this.
You're thinking about it, aren't you? I can smell it. I can smell it. You're thinking about it. Yes, you said of course, yeah.
Well, of course, we're thinking about the future of the party. But look, let's be clear. You can change the leader, but unless we get the message right, we're not going to win. And I think we can't shy away from some of the arguments perhaps we should have had before now. Because unless we face up to them, how do you deliver progressive values in a fiscally cold climate? How do you do it when technology is changing everything? And how do we make sure that we can pay our way in the world when we're facing more international competition from the likes of India, China and others?
Would you like the Labour Party to settle the leadership question quickly or let it drag on for a few months?
I think the rules were changed to open out the party and build our movement. And so we need to allow time for that to happen.
Chuka Umunna, for now, thank you very much indeed. For the moment, we're going to talk in a moment more to him and to Lord Mandelson, I hope. After this programme, however, there's going to be live coverage of the VE Day commemorations not far away from me in Westminster. But in the meantime, let's take a quick look at what's going to be on BBC Two at 10 o'clock.
Join us at 10 on BBC Two when we're asking one very big question. Has human rights law achieved more than religion for mankind? Join human rights campaigners, lawyers, defenders and believers from many faiths for a big debate on BBC Two at 10.
Thank you very much. Well, Chuka Umunna is still with me, and we've been joined, as I hoped, again by Lord Mandelson. Now, I'm not expecting a kind of laying on of hands here or anything, but he's the kind of candidate who is saying the kind of things that you were talking about earlier on.
Look, I wish Chuka was sitting here as the business secretary because he would have been, building on and taking forward a lot of the things that I believed in and was trying to do when I was in his job. So he has a little wait to go, but I think he'll get there.
You both spoke about Scotland, and in the wastes of election night, I was talking to Charles Clarke, former Home Secretary under Labour, who said he thought the time had come for the Labour Party in Scotland to detach itself from the Labour Party in the rest of the country. A sister party arrangement, always vote together in Westminster and so forth, but it should be a different kind of party. And I wondered what the two of you thought about that.
Well, I think in some senses we've struggled because whilst we've made the case, and I fundamentally believe we need a new, more federal model in the UK for a devolved framework in our country, we haven't quite worked out how that operates within the Scottish Party. And by the way, I think Jim has done an excellent job and in many respects was being given a task I'm not sure anybody would have been able to achieve. But don't forget, I mean, one thing I forgot to say, it isn't just the unity of the UK we're looking at, which is potentially under threat, this Parliament. We've also got to make sure that the UK remains a member of the European Union. And I think it's absolutely essential that the Labour Party is at the forefront of that campaign.
Okay, our final thought then with Lord Manderson, former Commissioner himself. Now, we've always said that David Cameron can't possibly get the deal he wants, many people have, and before he comes back to the EU referendum, an incredibly difficult task. Now he possibly could. He's got the authority, he's got the wind in his back. If he strikes now, he could get the kind of deal that would persuade the Conservative Party to back him in a pro-European referendum, could he not?
Depends what he's going to ask for. I mean, if he goes into those negotiations with an agenda supplied to him by his madcap backbenchers, then he's going to get precisely nowhere. If he goes in with a slightly more intelligent reform agenda, which, by the way, there is a very large constituency of support for across the European Union, then I think he will get somewhere.
What about the idea of a veto for things that we think are against our national interest, as it were, a Luxembourg compromise in English?
Yeah, but do we want to see the French and the Spanish and others doing that too, in vital liberalising reforms that we need, for example, in the single market? Every country has a veto. That's not a European Union anymore.
I mean, I have to say, Andrew, you know, there's lots of analogies with 92 here. I mean, I think the issues and challenges the Prime Minister will face with his backbenchers in this Parliament will make the challenges that John Major faced with the Maastricht rebels look like a complete tea party, and there's an opportunity.
Well, if he's watching, he'll be shaking his head. We will see. Thank you both very much indeed. It's been a very, very interesting morning, but it's all we've got time for. Thanks to all my guests. There's more from the Sunday Politics Show with Andrew Neil on this channel at 1:30. He'll be talking to Labour's Liz Kendall, another potential leadership candidate. Join me again back in the studio next week, but for now, from a much changed Westminster, thank you and goodbye.
With a special service